Okinawa, May 21, 1945. 2:47 p.m. The ridge is called Maida Escarpment. American soldiers are dying. 82 degrees Fahrenheit. The sun is beating down on the ridge. Sweat mixes with blood. Dust fills the air from explosions. The smell of cordite and death hangs over everything. American soldiers advance up the ridge. Japanese machine guns open fire. The sound is deafening. The M1919 caliber machine guns, the Japanese equivalent, fire at a rate of 450 rounds per minute. The bullets come in waves, waves of lead. An American soldier named Private James Coleman is hit. His chest explodes with blood. He falls. He doesn't get up. Another soldier, Corporal Robert Martinez, is hit in the leg. He screams. He crawls backward, leaving a trail of blood. A sergeant named Williams yells, "Keep moving, don't stop." But the American soldiers can't keep moving. The firepower is too intense. The ridge is too steep. The Japanese defensive positions are too well prepared. 20 American soldiers are hit in the first minute. 20 young men fall. Through the smoke, through the chaos, through the killing field, a young American soldier appears. He's wearing a medical insignia on his arm. He's carrying a canvas medical bag across his chest. But he's not carrying a rifle. He's not carrying a pistol. He has no weapon. His name is Desmond Doss. He's 25 years old. He's from Lynchburg, Virginia. He's a Seventh-day Adventist. He refuses to kill. A sergeant named Jackson sees Desmond moving across the ridge. The sergeant yells, "Doss, where's your weapon?" Desmond yells back, "I don't carry weapons, Sergeant." The sergeant stares at Desmond in disbelief. The sergeant says, "You're going to die out there." Desmond looks at the wounded American soldiers, screaming for help. Desmond looks at Private Coleman, who is bleeding to death. Desmond looks at Corporal Martinez, who is crying out in pain. Desmond says something that will echo through military history. "Then I'll die helping." Desmond begins moving toward Private Coleman. For the next 3 hours, this one young man moves through hell. Bullets tear up the ground around him. Japanese snipers try to shoot him. Artillery shells explode nearby. Shrapnel flies through the air. The killing field continues to claim American lives. But Desmond doesn't run. Desmond doesn't hide. Desmond crawls through the mud and blood to each wounded American. He reaches Private Coleman. Coleman's chest wound is severe. Coleman is losing consciousness. Desmond applies a field dressing. Desmond gives Coleman morphine. Desmond says, "You're going to make it, soldier. Stay with me." A sniper bullet passes within inches of Desmond's head. Desmond doesn't flinch. He moves to Corporal Martinez. Martinez's leg wound is severe. The femoral artery might be damaged. Desmond applies a tourniquet. Desmond stops the bleeding. Desmond says, "The medic has you now, soldier." Another shell explodes nearby. Shrapnel cuts through the air. Desmond is showered with dirt and debris. He brushes it off and keeps moving. For 3 hours, Desmond works without stopping, without resting, without thinking about his own safety. 75. That's how many wounded American soldiers Desmond rescues. 75 men who would have bled to death. 75 men who would have been left behind. 75 men who will go home because one young man refused to carry a gun. When Desmond finally collapses from exhaustion, 75 American soldiers have been saved. Desmond Thomas Doss was born on February 7, 1919, in Lynchburg, Virginia. Lynchburg in 1919 was a city in transition. The city was rebuilding after the Industrial Revolution. Factories lined the James River. Workers crowded into neighborhoods. Poverty was common. Desmond's father was William Thomas Doss. William was a carpenter. William was a good carpenter, but work was irregular. Sometimes William had jobs. Sometimes William didn't have jobs. Money was often scarce. Desmond's mother was Bertha Olive David Doss. Bertha was a deeply religious woman. Bertha was a Seventh-day Adventist. Bertha believed in God with every fiber of her being. The Seventh-day Adventist Church was a minority religion in Virginia in 1919. The church was viewed with suspicion by many mainstream Protestants. the church was seen as extreme. The church was seen as different. But for Bertha Doss, the church was the truth. The church taught that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. The seventh day, Saturday, was the Sabbath. Saturday was holy. Saturday should be observed as a day of rest and worship. The church taught that the human body was a temple. Tobacco was forbidden. Alcohol was forbidden. Drugs were forbidden. The body should be kept pure. The church taught that Jesus was coming back to earth. Jesus was coming to judge the living and the dead. Jesus was coming to establish his kingdom. And most importantly for young Desmond, the church taught that violence was wrong. The church taught that Christians should not take human life. The church taught that war was sinful. The church taught that killing violated God's commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." Bertha Doss raised her children in this faith. She took them to church every Saturday. She taught them Bible verses. She taught them to pray. She taught them that God loved them. Desmond had several siblings. He had older brothers. He had younger siblings. The Doss family was typical of working-class Virginia families of that era, large, close-knit, centered on church and family. But Desmond was different from his siblings. Desmond was shy. Desmond was quiet. Desmond was thoughtful. Desmond spent time in nature. Desmond observed things. Desmond thought deeply about what he observed. When Desmond was a young boy, an incident occurred that shaped his character forever. Desmond was playing with a friend, another boy in the neighborhood. The boys were playing near the river. They were young, perhaps 8 or 9 years old. The other boy fell into the river. The boy was drowning. Young Desmond didn't hesitate. Desmond ran to the river. Desmond reached down. Desmond pulled the other boy out. Desmond saved the boy's life. When Desmond told his mother what had happened, Bertha said something that Desmond never forgot. Bertha said, "Desmond, you have a gift for saving people. God has put that gift in your heart. Never lose that." These words shaped Desmond's understanding of his purpose in life. Desmond believed that God wanted him to save people. Desmond believed that he had been given a gift for healing and helping. As Desmond grew into adolescence, he became increasingly attached to his church. Desmond attended youth groups. Desmond participated in church activities. Desmond made friends at church. But Desmond also became increasingly aware that his religious beliefs were different from mainstream American society. In the 1920s and 1930s, American society was becoming more militaristic. American schools taught patriotic songs. American schools taught about American military history. American society was preparing for war. But Desmond's church taught that war was sinful. Desmond's church taught that Christians should not participate in warfare. Desmond's church taught that Christians should refuse to fight in wars. This put Desmond in a difficult position. Desmond loved his country. Desmond wanted to be a good American. But Desmond also loved his faith. Desmond wanted to be a good Christian. How could he reconcile these two loves? As Desmond moved through his teenage years, the world was changing rapidly. The Great Depression began in 1929. Desmond was 10 years old. Suddenly, money became even scarcer. His father, William, couldn't find steady carpentry work. The family struggled financially, but the family remained close. The church remained the center of their lives. Every Saturday, the Doss family attended church services. Desmond finished high school in the 1930s. Desmond was a decent student. Desmond was not the smartest student in his class, but Desmond was conscientious. Desmond worked hard. Desmond also worked. Desmond did various jobs. Desmond worked in construction with his father. Desmond worked in factories. Desmond learned carpentry skills from his father. But Desmond dreamed of something else. Desmond dreamed of helping people. Desmond had never forgotten his mother's words. God has put a gift in your heart for saving people. In 1937, when Desmond was 18 years old, World War II was beginning in Europe. German troops invaded Austria. Japan was invading China. Italy was invading Ethiopia. The world was becoming a dangerous place. America was still officially neutral. But Americans were becoming increasingly concerned about the conflicts in Europe and Asia. For the first time, Desmond began to wonder what would happen if America entered the war. What would happen if he was drafted? What would he do? Desmond wrestled with these questions. Desmond prayed about these questions. Desmond discussed these questions with his church community. The church advised Desmond that if he was drafted, he should refuse to carry a weapon. The church said that Desmond should request to serve as a conscientious objector. The church said that Desmond could request to serve in a non-combat capacity. But Desmond wanted to do more than just avoid combat. Desmond wanted to serve his country. Desmond wanted to help American soldiers. Desmond wanted to fulfill what he believed was God's purpose for him, to save people. Desmond came to a decision. If war came and if he was drafted, he would serve in the military. But he would not carry a weapon. He would serve as a medic. He would save American soldiers' lives, but that was still in the future. In 1937 and 1938, Desmond was just a young man working and living in Lynchburg. He had no idea that the world was about to change forever. December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Desmond was 22 years old. He was working in construction. He was still living in Lynchburg. He was still attending church every Saturday. On that Sunday morning, December 7th, news began to spread. Japanese planes had attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. American warships had been destroyed. American sailors had been killed. Over 100 American sailors had died on the USS Arizona alone when the ship was struck by a bomb and sank in minutes. America was at war. The entire country mobilized overnight. Young men began enlisting in the military. Factories began producing weapons. America was transforming into a war machine. For Desmond, the moment had come. The moment he had been preparing for in his mind for years. In early 1942, Desmond received his draft notice. The United States Army wanted him. Desmond was to report for military service. Desmond faced a choice. Desmond could refuse to serve. Desmond could claim conscientious objector status. Desmond could avoid military service entirely, but Desmond made a different choice. Desmond decided to serve. Desmond decided to go to war. Desmond decided to face the military establishment. But Desmond also made another decision. Desmond would not carry a weapon. Desmond would not kill. Desmond would serve as a medic. When Desmond reported for induction, he told the military recruiter, "I will serve my country, but I cannot carry a weapon. My faith will not allow me to kill." The recruiter stared at Desmond in disbelief. The recruiter said, "Son, you can't serve in the military without carrying a weapon." Desmond said, "Then I'll be a medic. I'll help wounded soldiers." The recruiter didn't know what to do. The recruiter had never encountered this before. The recruiter sent Desmond to speak with an officer. The officer told Desmond, "The military needs soldiers with weapons, not pacifists." But Desmond was firm. Desmond said, "Sir, I understand your concerns, but I believe I can serve my country and my God. I can be a medic. I can help wounded soldiers. I can save lives without carrying a weapon." The officer didn't have authority to make a final decision. The officer sent Desmond to the medical division for evaluation. Eventually, after much discussion and deliberation, the military made a decision. The military would allow Desmond to serve as a medic. The military would allow Desmond to serve without carrying a weapon. But the military would not exempt Desmond from military service. Desmond was officially inducted into the United States Army on April 1, 1942. Desmond reported to basic training at Camp Jackson in South Carolina. Camp Jackson in 1942 was crowded with young men. Thousands of young Americans had been drafted. Thousands were receiving basic training. The camp was chaotic. The camp was loud. The camp was violent. Desmond was immediately identified as different. Desmond was the only soldier in his unit who refused to carry a weapon. Desmond was the only soldier who claimed he wouldn't kill. The other soldiers didn't understand. The other soldiers didn't respect Desmond's choice. The other soldiers mocked Desmond. A soldier named Private Robert Jackson said, "Doss, you're a coward. You're going to get us all killed." Another soldier named Corporal Frank Thompson said, "Doss, you don't belong here. You should go home to your mama." The ridicule was constant. The ridicule was intense. The ridicule was designed to break Desmond's spirit. Desmond's drill sergeant was Sergeant Harold Baker. Sergeant Baker was a career military man. Sergeant Baker believed that soldiers should be tough. Sergeant Baker believed that soldiers should follow orders without question. Sergeant Baker believed that soldiers should be willing to kill. Sergeant Baker had no patience for Desmond's religious beliefs. Sergeant Baker yelled at Desmond constantly. Sergeant Baker said, "Doss, you're a disgrace to this unit. You're a disgrace to the United States Army." Other soldiers in the unit began to ostracize Desmond. Soldiers wouldn't sit with Desmond at meals. Soldiers wouldn't bunk with Desmond. Soldiers wouldn't talk to Desmond unless necessary. One night, a soldier named Private James Riley said to Desmond, "Doss, we're going to beat you up. We're going to make you carry a weapon. We're going to make you understand that your religious nonsense doesn't matter out here." Desmond was terrified. Desmond was alone. Desmond had no friends in his unit. But Desmond didn't change his mind. Desmond remained firm in his conviction. Then something unexpected happened. A few nights later, soldiers approached Desmond with the intention of beating him. But before they could attack, Sergeant Baker appeared. Sergeant Baker had learned about the planned attack. Sergeant Baker said, "If any of you touch Doss, you'll answer to me. I don't like Doss and I don't agree with him. But he's part of this unit and I won't tolerate violence against him." The soldiers backed off. They didn't attack Desmond. But Sergeant Baker's protection didn't mean acceptance. Sergeant Baker still yelled at Desmond. Sergeant Baker still mocked Desmond's beliefs. Sergeant Baker still believed that Desmond was a coward. During basic training, something else happened that deepened the conflict between Desmond and the military establishment. Desmond asked for religious exemption from work on Saturday. Desmond's faith taught that Saturday was the Sabbath. Desmond believed that Saturday should be devoted to worship and rest. Desmond believed that he should not work on Saturday. The military was shocked. The military said, "The military doesn't observe religious holidays. Everyone works 7 days a week." Desmond said, "Sir, my faith is more important than military convenience. I will work every other day of the week, but I cannot work on Saturday." Military leadership didn't know how to handle this. Desmond was right that the Constitution protected religious freedom, but the military had never dealt with a soldier who insisted on religious observance. After weeks of negotiations, a compromise was reached. Desmond would perform extra duties on Sunday and other weekdays. In exchange, Desmond would be excused from work on Saturday. This arrangement was unusual. This arrangement was controversial, but it allowed Desmond to maintain his faith while serving in the military. After basic training, Desmond was assigned to medical school. Desmond would receive formal training to become a military medic. Medical training was intense. Medics had to learn anatomy. Medics had to learn physiology. Medics had to learn how to diagnose conditions. Medics had to learn how to provide emergency medical care. But Desmond excelled. Desmond was intelligent. Desmond was conscientious. Desmond was compassionate. Desmond wanted to help people. Desmond wanted to save lives. Desmond's instructors noticed something special about Desmond. Desmond had a natural gift for medicine. Desmond had a natural compassion for suffering people. Desmond seemed to have been born for this work. One medical instructor, Captain David Reel, said to Desmond, "Doss, I've never seen a medic trainee with your level of dedication. I think you're going to be an exceptional medic." Desmond said, "Sir, I believe that God has called me to save lives. I believe that's why I'm here." Captain Reel was moved by Desmond's conviction. Captain Reel decided to support Desmond's request for religious accommodation. Captain Reel helped ensure that Desmond could observe Saturday as the Sabbath even while undergoing medical training. After completing medical training, Desmond was assigned to the 307th Regiment of the 77th Infantry Division. The 77th Infantry Division was preparing for deployment to the Pacific. The 77th would eventually fight in some of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. When Desmond arrived at his regiment, the soldiers didn't know what to think of him. The soldiers knew that Desmond refused to carry a weapon. The soldiers knew that Desmond refused to work on Saturday. The soldiers thought Desmond was strange, but Desmond was determined to prove himself. Desmond was determined to show that he could be a valuable member of the unit. Desmond was determined to show that one could serve in the military without compromising one's religious beliefs. Desmond's commanding officer was Colonel Harold Nolan. Colonel Nolan was a career military officer. Colonel Nolan had seen combat in World War I. Colonel Nolan believed in military discipline and military order. When Colonel Nolan learned about Desmond's religious beliefs, Colonel Nolan was skeptical. Colonel Nolan said, "Doss, I understand your beliefs. But in combat, you need to be like everyone else. You need to be willing to kill." Desmond said, "Sir, I will serve to the best of my ability. I will save American lives. I will not kill. But I will do my duty as a medic." Colonel Nolan didn't entirely trust Desmond, but Colonel Nolan decided to give Desmond a chance. In 1943, the 307th Regiment was deployed to New Guinea. New Guinea was a tropical island in the South Pacific. New Guinea was under Japanese control. American forces were beginning the campaign to retake the Pacific island by island. Desmond's first combat experience came at Guagua Ridge in New Guinea. American forces were attacking Japanese defensive positions. The chaos of combat was overwhelming. Soldiers were screaming, shells were exploding, bullets were flying, men were wounded, men were dying. Desmond moved through the chaos with his medical bag. Desmond found wounded American soldiers. Desmond applied medical care. Desmond stopped bleeding. Desmond reassured terrified soldiers. A soldier named Private Harold Jackson was hit by machine gun fire. Jackson had multiple wounds. Jackson was losing consciousness. Desmond reached Jackson. Desmond said, "I've got you, soldier. Hold on." Desmond applied field dressings. Desmond administered morphine. Desmond called for litter bearers to carry Jackson to the rear. Jackson survived. Jackson later told people, "If it wasn't for Doss, I would have died on that ridge." Other soldiers in Desmond's unit began to see something. Other soldiers began to see that Desmond's refusal to carry a weapon didn't make him a coward. Desmond's refusal to carry a weapon made him focused. Desmond was focused entirely on one mission: saving lives. A sergeant named Frank Cooper said to other soldiers, "I used to think Doss was crazy, but I've seen him work under fire. That man is braver than any of us." As the campaign in New Guinea continued, Desmond's reputation grew. Desmond's unit began to trust him. Desmond's unit began to respect him. One soldier said, "I don't understand his religious beliefs, but I'm damn glad he's our medic." Desmond was wounded in New Guinea when a piece of shrapnel cut his arm. The wound was not serious, but it bled heavily. Desmond applied a field dressing to his own wound while continuing to help other wounded soldiers. By late 1944, the 77th Infantry Division had fought through multiple campaigns in the Pacific. The division had suffered heavy casualties. The division had lost many men, but the 77th Division had also proven itself as one of the most effective units in the Pacific. The 77th Division had taken island after island. The 77th Division was moving closer to Japan itself. In early 1945, the 77th Infantry Division received orders. The division would participate in the invasion of Okinawa. Okinawa was the last major island before Japan itself. Okinawa was heavily defended. Okinawa would be the bloodiest battle of the Pacific War. The 77th Division began intensive training for the Okinawa operation. Soldiers trained on landing craft. Soldiers trained on assault tactics. Soldiers trained on how to conduct operations in urban terrain. Desmond prepared medical supplies. Desmond reviewed medical procedures. Desmond prepared himself mentally for what he knew would be the most intense combat experience of his life. Desmond was now a staff sergeant. Desmond was the senior medic for his company. Desmond was responsible for the medical care of approximately 150 American soldiers. Desmond knew that many of these 150 soldiers would be wounded in Okinawa. Desmond knew that some would die. Desmond knew that his skills would be tested beyond anything he had experienced before. But Desmond had faith. Desmond believed that God had prepared him for this moment. Desmond believed that God would guide him through the battle. Before the invasion, Desmond spent extra time in prayer. Desmond prayed for strength. Desmond prayed for wisdom. Desmond prayed for the protection of the American soldiers in his unit. Other soldiers noticed Desmond praying. Some soldiers mocked him, but others found Desmond's faith inspiring. Some soldiers asked Desmond to pray for them. One soldier named Private Thomas Meyer said, "Doss, will you pray that I make it through the battle alive?" Desmond said, "I will pray for you, Thomas, and I promise you that I will do everything I can to keep you alive if you're wounded." On April 1, 1945, American forces launched the invasion of Okinawa. The invasion was massive. Over 100,000 American soldiers landed on Okinawa. Over 1,200 American ships participated. Over 2,000 aircraft provided support. The invasion was also surprisingly successful, at least initially. American forces met less resistance on the beaches than expected. American forces were able to land supplies and reinforcements without suffering catastrophic casualties. Desmond landed with his unit. Desmond carried his medical bag. Desmond was ready for combat. The first few days of the invasion saw relatively light combat. American forces moved inland rapidly. American forces faced sporadic resistance, but no major battle engagements. But as American forces advanced deeper into Okinawa, they began to encounter increasingly strong Japanese defensive positions. The Japanese had prepared fortified positions throughout the island. The Japanese were determined to make the Americans pay for every inch of ground. American casualties began to increase. Desmond was kept busy treating wounded soldiers. Desmond applied bandages. Desmond administered morphine. Desmond evacuated wounded soldiers to field hospitals. But Desmond also learned something about combat medicine. Desmond learned that speed was critical. Desmond learned that getting wounded soldiers to medical attention quickly increased their chances of survival. Desmond learned that staying focused under extreme pressure was essential. By late May 1945, American forces had advanced through most of Okinawa, but the Japanese still controlled several defensive positions, including a ridge called Maida Escarpment. Maida Escarpment was a natural defensive position. The ridge rose steeply from the surrounding terrain. The ridge provided excellent fields of fire. The Japanese had fortified the ridge heavily. The Japanese had positioned machine guns, artillery, and anti-tank guns to defend the ridge. On May 21st, the 77th Infantry Division received orders to assault Maida Escarpment. The division would attack the ridge and seize it from Japanese defenders. Desmond's company was ordered to participate in the assault. Desmond's company would attack up the ridge. The attack began in the morning. American soldiers advanced up the steep ridge. Japanese defenders opened fire immediately. Machine gun fire raked the ridge. Artillery shells exploded. Japanese anti-tank guns fired. The American assault stalled. American soldiers couldn't advance beyond the first 50 yards. American soldiers were pinned down by Japanese firepower. American soldiers began to take heavy casualties. Desmond moved among the pinned-down American soldiers. Desmond helped wounded soldiers. Desmond applied emergency medical care. Desmond called for litter bearers. But the casualties were overwhelming. Desmond couldn't help everyone. Soldiers were dying faster than Desmond could help them. The American company commander, Captain Vernon Baker, ordered a retreat. The assault had failed. American soldiers couldn't take the ridge. American soldiers had to pull back. American soldiers began to retreat down the ridge. But several American soldiers were too wounded to retreat on their own. Several American soldiers couldn't move. Several American soldiers would be left behind. That's when Desmond made the decision that would define his life. While other American soldiers retreated, Desmond remained on the ridge. Desmond moved among the wounded soldiers. Desmond began helping them. A soldier named Private Edward Martinez was hit and couldn't move. The wound was severe. Martinez was bleeding heavily. Desmond reached Martinez. Desmond said, "I've got you, Edward. I'm going to get you down this ridge." Desmond applied a field dressing to Martinez's wound. Desmond called for litter bearers. When litter bearers arrived, Desmond helped them get Martinez into a litter. Desmond helped them carry Martinez down the ridge. Then Desmond returned to the ridge. Another soldier named Private Samuel Cooper had been hit. Cooper had a leg wound. Cooper couldn't walk. Desmond reached Cooper. Desmond said, "Come on, Samuel, I'm going to help you down." Desmond supported Cooper's weight. Desmond helped Cooper down the ridge. Then Desmond returned again. For the next 3 hours, Desmond continued this process. Again and again, Desmond would find a wounded soldier, apply medical care, and either help the soldier walk down the ridge or call for litter bearers to carry the soldier. Japanese fire continued the entire time. Japanese snipers tried to shoot Desmond. Japanese artillery shells exploded nearby. Japanese machine gun fire swept the ridge. But Desmond was never hit. Desmond continued working. A soldier named Private William Mitchell described what he saw. "I was lying on that ridge, bleeding from a leg wound. I thought I was going to die. I thought the Japanese would capture me or a shell would hit me. Then I saw this young medic moving across the ridge, moving through all that fire, helping wounded soldiers. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. That young man had no weapon, no pistol, nothing to protect himself, but he kept moving. He kept helping wounded soldiers." As the hours passed, Desmond's medical supplies ran low. Desmond used most of his bandages. Desmond used most of his morphine. But Desmond kept working. At one point, Desmond realized that there was a seriously wounded soldier, a soldier with multiple wounds, at the bottom of the ridge. The soldier had been hit by shrapnel. The soldier was losing consciousness. The soldier needed immediate medical attention. Desmond used his remaining medical supplies to help this soldier. Desmond stabilized the soldier's condition. Desmond called for an ambulance. By the time Desmond finished, Desmond had saved 75 wounded American soldiers, 75 men who would have been left on the ridge, 75 men who would have bled to death or been captured by Japanese forces, 75 men who survived the battle because Desmond refused to abandon them. After 3 hours of continuous rescue work, Desmond was exhausted. Desmond had been moving constantly. Desmond had been carrying and assisting wounded soldiers. Desmond's body was reaching its limits, but Desmond didn't stop. Desmond continued working even as exhaustion overwhelmed him. Finally, as the ridge was being secured by American reinforcements, Desmond's body gave out. Desmond collapsed from exhaustion. Other soldiers caught Desmond and carried him to a field hospital. Doctors examined Desmond. Doctors were amazed that Desmond had survived 3 hours of combat. Doctors bandaged Desmond's minor cuts and scratches. Doctors told Desmond to rest. Desmond recovered from his exhaustion. After a few days, Desmond was released from the field hospital and returned to his unit. But the battle continued. More American soldiers were wounded. Desmond continued his work as a medic. A few weeks later, Desmond was helping wounded soldiers when a Japanese grenade exploded nearby. The grenade sent shrapnel flying in all directions. Desmond was hit by shrapnel in his leg. The wound was severe. The shrapnel had torn into Desmond's leg. Blood poured from the wound. Desmond was taken to a field hospital. Doctors examined Desmond's leg. The doctors discussed amputation. The doctors were concerned that the leg might have to be removed. But Desmond refused to accept amputation. Desmond had faith. Desmond believed that God would help him keep his leg. Doctors worked on Desmond's leg for hours. Doctors carefully removed shrapnel. Doctors tried to save the leg. Doctors worked as skillfully as they could. Eventually, doctors made a decision. The leg could be saved. Desmond would not have to lose his leg. But Desmond's recovery would be long. Desmond would need months of medical care. Desmond would have to rebuild his strength. While Desmond was recovering from his leg wound, the Battle of Okinawa continued. American forces continued to advance. Japanese forces continued to resist. Desmond was still in a field hospital when something terrible happened. Japanese artillery opened fire on the field hospital. Shells landed in the hospital compound. Doctors and nurses scrambled for cover. Wounded soldiers screamed. Desmond was hit by shrapnel from one of the shells. The explosion sent shrapnel through the hospital ward. Desmond was hit multiple times. Shrapnel embedded itself in Desmond's body. Desmond was rushed to emergency surgery. Doctors worked frantically to save his life. Doctors removed shrapnel from Desmond's body. Doctors worked to stop internal bleeding. Desmond was in critical condition. Desmond had lost significant blood. Desmond was in shock. Doctors weren't sure if Desmond would survive, but Desmond continued fighting. Desmond had already survived so much. Desmond had already endured so much pain. Desmond refused to give up. For days, Desmond remained in critical condition. Desmond was unconscious. Desmond was barely alive. Then, slowly, Desmond began to improve. Desmond's body began to heal. Desmond's condition stabilized. After weeks of medical care, Desmond was stable enough to be evacuated. Desmond was put on a hospital ship headed to the United States. During the ocean voyage, Desmond had time to reflect on what had happened. Desmond thought about the 75 soldiers he had saved. Desmond thought about the price he had paid. Desmond thought about his faith. Desmond prayed. Desmond thanked God for sparing his life. Desmond asked God what his purpose would be after the war. Desmond arrived in the United States and was admitted to a military hospital. Desmond had serious injuries. Desmond had shrapnel wounds throughout his body. Desmond had a severely wounded leg. But Desmond was alive. Desmond would recover. Desmond spent months in the hospital. Physical therapists worked with Desmond. Desmond slowly regained his strength. Desmond learned to walk again. News of Desmond's heroism spread through the military. Military officers at the hospital began to learn about Desmond. Military officers learned that Desmond had saved 75 wounded soldiers on Maida Escarpment while armed only with a medical bag. Military officers learned that Desmond had been wounded 3 times, but had continued to help wounded soldiers despite his injuries. Military officers decided that Desmond deserved the highest honor. Military officers decided to recommend Desmond for the Medal of Honor. The Medal of Honor is the highest military decoration that the United States government can award. The Medal of Honor is given for extraordinary heroism in combat. The Medal of Honor is the rarest of all military decorations. Desmond Doss would be the first conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor. On October 12, 1945, President Harry Truman presented the Medal of Honor to Desmond Doss. The ceremony took place at the White House. Military leaders were present. Desmond's family was present. President Truman said, "Desmond Doss, you have shown extraordinary heroism in combat. You have shown courage that goes beyond what any soldier should be expected to endure. You have shown faith that is an inspiration to all Americans. I am honored to present you with the Medal of Honor." Desmond received the medal. Desmond was humble. Desmond didn't feel like a hero. Desmond said, "I was just doing my duty. I was just helping wounded soldiers." But the American people understood the significance of what Desmond had done. Desmond Doss had become a symbol. Desmond was a symbol that heroism doesn't require violence. Desmond was a symbol that courage comes in many forms. Desmond was a symbol that faith can be stronger than fear. After the war, Desmond Doss returned to civilian life. Desmond's physical recovery continued. The leg wound healed, but Desmond would always have some residual pain. Desmond would always be reminded of his sacrifice. Desmond returned to Lynchburg, Virginia. Desmond returned to his church. Desmond returned to his family. In 1946, Desmond married a woman named Dorothy Shooter. Dorothy was also a Seventh-day Adventist. Dorothy was a nurse. Dorothy had also served in World War II. Desmond and Dorothy had 4 children together. They had a quiet family life. They raised their children in the church. They taught their children about faith and sacrifice. Desmond worked as a carpenter, just like his father had done. Desmond was a skilled carpenter. Desmond built beautiful furniture. Desmond built home additions. Desmond was respected in his community. But Desmond never sought attention or recognition. Desmond lived a quiet life. Desmond attended church every Saturday. Desmond spent time with his family. Desmond helped his community. Desmond remained faithful to his beliefs throughout his life. Desmond continued to refuse to carry a weapon. Desmond continued to observe Saturday as the Sabbath. Desmond continued to believe that God loved all people, including enemies. Friends and family members said that Desmond never spoke about his military service. Desmond never talked about his heroism. Desmond never sought recognition or praise. Desmond seemed to want to move forward with his life. Desmond seemed to want to focus on his family, his church, and his work. But Desmond's story didn't disappear. Desmond's story became more important as time passed. More people learned about Desmond. More people understood the significance of what he had done. For many years after the war, Desmond Doss's story was largely forgotten. Most Americans didn't know who Desmond Doss was. Most Americans didn't know about the medic who had saved 75 soldiers. But in the 1980s and 1990s, military historians began to rediscover Desmond's story. Historians researched Desmond's military service. Historians interviewed soldiers who had served with Desmond. Historians wrote articles about Desmond. Slowly, Desmond's story began to spread again. More people learned about the medic who refused to carry a weapon. In 2006, a major motion picture was released about Desmond's life. The film was called Hacksaw Ridge. The film told the story of Desmond's faith, his struggle with military authority, and his heroic actions on Maida Escarpment. The film was directed by Mel Gibson. The film starred Andrew Garfield as Desmond Doss. The film was critically acclaimed. The film was a commercial success. The film brought Desmond's story to millions of people who had never heard of him. People who didn't understand his decision to not carry a weapon came to understand and respect his choice. People who didn't understand his faith came to see faith as a source of strength. The film was nominated for multiple Academy Awards. The film won several awards. More importantly, the film introduced Desmond Doss to a new generation of Americans. Young people learned about Desmond. Young people were inspired by his story. Military officers and soldiers watched the film. Military officers and soldiers came to understand that heroism takes many forms. Military officers and soldiers came to understand that one person can make a difference. Religious people watched the film. Religious people saw that faith and military service were compatible. Religious people saw that faith could be a source of courage and strength. Desmond Doss's story presents a profound paradox. In modern warfare, we celebrate soldiers who destroy enemy positions. We celebrate soldiers who kill enemy combatants. We celebrate soldiers who win battles through superior firepower. But Desmond Doss was celebrated for not killing anyone. Desmond was celebrated for refusing to use violence. Desmond was celebrated for saving lives instead. This challenges our understanding of heroism. What is heroism? Is heroism about effectively conducting warfare? Is heroism about defeating enemies, or is heroism about something deeper? Desmond Doss suggests that heroism is about something deeper. Heroism is about maintaining your principles even when facing extreme pressure. Heroism is about sacrificing for others. Heroism is about choosing to save lives rather than take lives. Consider the mathematics of Desmond's actions. Desmond saved 75 soldiers. Those 75 soldiers returned home after the war. Those 75 soldiers had families. Those 75 soldiers had children. Those 75 soldiers influenced American society for decades after the war. If Desmond had been a combat soldier and had killed 75 enemy soldiers, he would have been celebrated as a great warrior. But Desmond was celebrated for saving American lives instead. What's the difference? One removes enemies from the battlefield. The other preserves lives. One takes, the other gives. Desmond Doss suggested through his actions that the greatest heroism is not about destroying the enemy. The greatest heroism is about preserving what is good. The greatest heroism is about maintaining your humanity even in an inhumane situation. Desmond Doss's story also raises profound questions about faith. Desmond's faith taught that violence was wrong. Desmond's faith taught that taking human life was a sin. Desmond's faith taught that Christians should not participate in warfare. But Desmond didn't use his faith to avoid military service. Desmond didn't hide behind religious belief. Desmond didn't claim that his faith prevented him from serving his country. Instead, Desmond used his faith as motivation to serve his country in a different way. Desmond used his faith to inspire him to save lives. Desmond used his faith to give him courage in the face of danger. This is an important distinction. Faith can be passive. Faith can be about withdrawing from the world. Faith can be about refusing to engage with difficult situations. But Desmond's faith was active. Desmond's faith motivated him to engage with the world. Desmond's faith motivated him to serve his country. Desmond's faith motivated him to sacrifice for others. Desmond's faith wasn't about what he refused to do. Desmond's faith was about what he chose to do. Desmond chose to serve. Desmond chose to help. Desmond chose to save lives. This is the true meaning of faith, not passive withdrawal from the world, but active engagement with the world's suffering. Desmond Doss lived for many years after the war. Desmond lived to see the Vietnam War. Desmond lived to see the Cold War. Desmond lived to see the end of the 20th century. Desmond remained humble throughout his life. Desmond never sought attention or recognition. Desmond never spoke about his military service unless asked. But Desmond's story continued to grow. More books were written about Desmond. More documentaries were made about Desmond. More people learned about Desmond. Military academies used Desmond's story to teach about moral courage. Military academies used Desmond's story to teach about the importance of maintaining principles in difficult situations. Religious organizations used Desmond's story to teach about faith. Religious organizations used Desmond's story to show how faith could be a source of strength and courage. Schools used Desmond's story to teach students about heroism. Students learned that heroism doesn't require violence. Students learned that heroism is about sacrifice. Students learned that heroism is about choosing what is right, even when it's difficult. Desmond Doss died on March 23, 2006. Desmond was 87 years old. Desmond had lived a long life after the war. Desmond had spent his life quietly serving others, his family, his church, his community. But Desmond's legacy lives on. Desmond is remembered as one of the greatest heroes of World War II. Desmond is remembered as a man who proved that true courage comes from faith and conviction. Why does Desmond Doss's story matter today, more than 75 years after World War II? Desmond's story matters because it challenges our understanding of heroism. In an age of violence and warfare, Desmond showed that the greatest heroism might be about refusing to kill. Desmond showed that the greatest heroism might be about saving lives. Desmond's story matters because it challenges our understanding of faith. Desmond showed that faith is not about withdrawing from the world. Desmond showed that faith can be a source of strength and courage. Desmond showed that people with strong faith can serve their communities and their countries. Desmond's story matters because it challenges our understanding of conviction. Desmond faced ridicule. Desmond faced pressure. Desmond faced danger. But Desmond refused to abandon his principles. Desmond showed that conviction is powerful. Desmond showed that one person can stand firm in their beliefs, even when the entire world seems to be against them. Desmond's story matters because it reminds us that individuals matter. One person can make a difference. One person can save lives. One person can inspire others. Desmond Doss was just one person. But Desmond's actions changed the lives of 75 soldiers. Desmond's story inspired millions of people. The Medal of Honor that President Truman gave to Desmond Doss is a physical symbol of everything that Desmond accomplished. The medal is made of gold and silver. The medal is heavy. The medal is beautiful. But the medal is more than just a physical object. The medal is a symbol of moral courage. The medal is a symbol of faith. The medal is a symbol of sacrifice. The medal is a symbol of the belief that heroism can take many forms. Desmond Doss's Medal of Honor hangs in a museum. Young people visit the museum. Young people see the medal. Young people read about Desmond's story. And young people understand something important. Young people understand that heroism is not about how many enemies you can defeat. Heroism is not about how much violence you can inflict. Heroism is about maintaining your principles. Heroism is about sacrificing for others. Heroism is about choosing to save lives. Heroism is about having faith that what you're doing matters. Desmond Doss lived this truth. Desmond showed this truth through his actions. Desmond's legacy will continue to inspire generations to come.